All right, so today we're meeting with Scott Kissell. He, you might know him as one of the photographers here on the Miami campus, but before he was here, he also was a news photographer working for several newspapers in Ohio. And really what he does today, these days on campus is he gets assignments, shoots assignments for the university, and a lot of them are newsy, a lot of them are featurey, and a lot of the things that you may be doing this week. So I thought we'd talk to him today and talk a little bit about how the job of news photographer, how you go about finding standalone photos to use as feature photos to use on the website. I would assume a lot of times.
Yes. When I worked at the Springfield News and Sun back in 1987. I started there, and I worked there from 1995. So basically, the life of a news photographer back then was finding photos that would be run in the daily papers. At our newspaper, they wanted 2 photos a day. They wanted one for the front page and one for the feature page, the local page they called it. So what we would do typically is, if we didn't have a story, a reporter story, we would have to go out and drive around town and find what they call feature photo, or a news photo of the day, an accident. We were very heavy into spot news because it was a small town paper. So we had a police scanner in our car. We would drive around. You would look around the neighborhood. If you saw something interesting, you would pull over, maybe do a feature photo of somebody doing something interesting in town. Finding feature photos was challenging at times. There's different ways you can do that. I did take some notes on that. Just finding photos. You can check the local listings of events going on in town. You can find stuff like that. Check with your contacts. Different people will let you know of interesting things going on in town. So we would keep track of that. Of course, listening to your news scanner for, of course, those weren't featured, those were news, and news just happens.
Well, news is good.
Yeah, news photos of fires or accidents or anything like that, but you were listening to your scanner for finding that. So basically, we had 2 photos a day we had to get. So if we didn't have a story.
And that was outside your assignments?
Yeah, outside the assignment. We would have general assignments for, from reporters for different stories, feature stories or portraits. Ball games, sporting events, or whatever beyond that. So, yeah, it was a fun time. I really enjoyed it. Every day was a little different. I think that was the big thing. You never knew what was going to happen that day. You may see smoke on the horizon and
you'd be ready to roll.
Ready to roll. I actually a couple times got to some fire scenes before the fire department got there, so that was always interesting. When you get there before the crews get on scene, they're like, "Did you have anything to do with this?"
So you always want flames, right? You
yeah,
always want flames.
Yeah. What makes really good feature photos too? Standalone photos for the local page, or kids and animals. If you can find kids out there playing or doing something, that always makes for a great feature photo.
So how can you go about doing that without looking or just creepy or?
Well, that's an interesting thing because you don't want to let people know you're there for some things, because you want to be able to capture the emotion of it without them knowing a camera's pointed at them. So sometimes you just get out of your car, you use a longer lens, and you kind of shoot it, and then when they notice you, if they do, sometimes they don't because they're so engaged in the activity they're doing, they don't really notice you. Then what you do is you approach them, and we usually had a tag around our neck that said who we were. I'd approach them and say, I'm a news photographer. And if it was a younger kid, I would usually say, are your parents home? Because usually they played around their home, and then I would talk to their parents and tell them who I was and this is what I was doing, get their name and information. You always have to be careful, and I think people are really sensitive to that, even more so today, because it just, they're worried about their kids and they don't know who the people are. So most people were pretty good about that. Once you showed them your badge and talked to them a little bit, they didn't think you were they believed who you were.
Right, and I think sometimes
student
student photographers actually get a little bit of an extra,
exactly.
people always love to help students. So
I think if you tell them you're a student photographer working on a project, and I did that too, because I took a photojournalism class. I remember my first class, and I told them that I was working on a project for my class, and most people understand,
right.
what you're doing, and they let you do what you're doing.
Yeah, exactly.
So.
Exactly. So when you do find a subject, sometimes how do you approach them? We talked a little bit about that.
Yeah.
Sometimes I guess you have to let them know you're shooting it because you want to try to get close.
Right.
And do you just tell them, hey, do what you're doing?
Yeah. I mean, there's a couple different things. There's, you do a feature portrait of somebody they usually know. Most of those are mostly assignments. If you're just catching somebody out there, usually I try to shoot them if they're engaged in an activity before, so I don't distract them from what they're doing. But if you're going on an assignment and somebody's in an environment and you're trying to capture that moment, I usually go up and I just start talking to them, try to make them feel at ease, talk, 10 or 15 minutes, talk about the weather, talk about themselves, talk about what they do. Kind of put the ownership on them. Say, hey, I want to get a nice photo of you. This is about you, and tell me about yourself. What do you do? What kind of things would be interesting in the photo if we run it in the paper that helps, tell the story.
Right.
So
how do you keep it from looking too posed?
Yeah, that's always challenging. People, when you first start taking out a camera like this and you point it at them, it's a big lens. It can be a little bit intimidating to a lot of people. I mean, the reason I like taking pictures is I like being on this side of the camera. I don't like getting my picture taken either. So it can be intimidating. So and they can they can feel unnatural, and they might not it may take a little bit of time for them to warm up. There's a couple techniques that I use. I'll always keep the camera down before I shoot, because if you're holding it up like this all the time, try to make eye contact with them. Make them feel comfortable. Another thing you can do is put a camera on a tripod with a cable release. I've done portraits like that where you can just set it up, shoot it with cable release, and that way you're making eye contact with them and you're making them feel comfortable.
A little bit more
Another thing you can do is just I call it the boring technique. Just let them sit there and and you say, go ahead and do what you're doing, and okay, and they'll start moving around doing what they're doing, and then you'll just kind of snap a few shots, put your camera down, act like you're not taking any pictures, and eventually they'll forget you're there, and they'll just be more natural about what they're doing. So, but it can be intimidating. One photographer said to me that to know how it feels to be getting your picture taken, do a self-portrait of yourself. Feel what that feels like. And I know how that feels too, because I have a camera. I don't really like getting my picture taken.
Right.
So I understand how
even
that feels.
getting on video.
Yeah, video. I don't feel comfortable doing this, but I'm doing it. So.
Well, we appreciate it. So when you approach a just like a feature shot, what camera do you usually? What kind of settings do you usually start out with? If you're outside or when you're inside, I guess that would be the different parts.
Well, there's a lot of different approaches to that. I wrote down a couple notes just to remember what I was trying to think about. But there's a lot of the newer cameras. I mean, it wasn't so much back in the day, but a lot of the newer cameras will have what they call aperture and shutter priority. And I kind of like to use aperture priority. Basically what that does is it sets the aperture, whatever you select the aperture to be, and keeps it at that. And then it adjusts the shutter speed depending on the light, intensity of the light. And basically aperture priority allows you to control the depth of field. In other words, the higher the aperture, like if you're wide open, you have less depth of field behind you. So
less in focus.
Less in focus. So you can so you can kind of control the background. For portraits and features, I think it's important that you kind of not have a whole lot of distractions in the background. So I like to use the longer lenses, like the zoom lenses, and put them at the lower apertures, and that way the backgrounds are kind of blurred, and you can kind of see the background, but it's not distracting. You got to watch for distractions. A lot of photographers like to get up close with a wide angle, and a wide angle is good too because you can eliminate some of the foreground distractions that you might get with a longer lens. So you can get, but a wide angle lens requires you to get really close to people, almost invading their personal space. But it also shows them the environment they're in, but
Right.
it also, gets in close. It's more intimate. A lot of photographers like to shoot that way. I prefer the longer lenses. One of my favorite lenses for just doing portraits is an 85, because when you're doing the portrait, I talked about the lenses just being kind of intimidating to people. This big one, you start pointing it at somebody, they may feel a little uncomfortable. So if you're doing a portrait, an 85 is a very, very nice lens. It's a fixed lens. It's very sharp. A lot of studio and portrait photographers use this lens. It's not nearly as intimidating as the big lens,
Right.
and you can say, it's a very sharp lens. What you'll find is a lot of these fixed lenses like the 85 are a lot sharper than your zooms. So if sharpness is important, these are the kind of lenses. This is a 24 to 70. This will give you a little bit of both. It'll give you like a wide angle and then also a zoom, almost like the 85, so you can get in and get a nice portrait. This is a nice lens to use for things. And usually what I try to do is carry two cameras, one with a zoom on it and one with this. That way I don't have to interchange, and I can go wide if I need to, and then I got the zoom capability that I can get right in close if I need to. But I think there's, you really, when you approach an assignment or anything like that, you want to try to capture different kinds of angles. And I wrote down just a few notes on that for myself. The first thing you want to do is just kind of an overall photograph of the scene when you get there. If you're whatever event you're covering, I always recommend you use a wider angle lens and just capture the whole scene. It kind of gives you perspective of the whole scene and what's going on. And usually I like to get at a higher angle and shoot down on it because you can see more what's going on. Then the next thing you do is kind of a medium range shot where you get in a little closer, so you focus on what is going on in that scene. It's a
Kind
little
of
more
looking at the composition.
yeah, composition. You want to get the people in, who are the people involved in the event, what's going on there, get their expressions. And then the other one is the close-up, which really, I think, photojournalism is really important because it gives you the most drama. It gets in close and is most interesting. I have an example of that, and this is a real simple one. Let me see if I can find that real quick.
He brought his portfolio.
Yeah, this is just kind of an interesting one. How it kind of shows. This is just a simple photo story I did on a guy who was 102 years old, and basically he.
Let me get this down a little bit.
Yeah, that's fine.
Okay.
This is a guy who was an alumni here at Miami, and he's 102 years old, and he had to throw out the first ceremonial pitch. And so what I did was I did more of a medium range shot of the coach shaking his hand, him actually pitching the ball and throwing the ball, and then I got that kind of that dramatic shot of him kind of close in, showing the hands. The guy's
hands.
I think he was 100. Actually, he was 102 years old.
Wow.
I think. So kind of shows that close in and adds a little bit of drama to it. It's a very simple, thing, but I recommend overall medium range, and then if you can get close in to show the details, that's always
To
good.
really tell the story in all angles.
Exactly. Yeah. So that's kind of my approach on shooting. I recommend that students you don't have to have a whole lot of equipment to do a good picture. I mean,
Right.
it's not about the equipment. It's about looking, seeing. No matter what lenses you have, you can always make a good image. But you have to look at your composition, think about what you're trying to show, think about what you're shooting. You know, not just point and shoot.
Oh, that looks good.
Yeah, that looks good. But you know, try different angles. You know, get low.
That's huge. Yeah.
Get high. You know, straight on. I think that's the biggest problem I have, and I have to kind of remind myself I got to think outside the box. You can't just stand at your eye level all the time and get an interesting picture. You have to kneel down. You have to look at, you know, getting up high and shooting down.
See if there's a stairs or
yeah,
anything like that, a balcony or.
There's different angles. You know, experiment. Go out and use different lenses for an assignment. Go out and use just one lens. I've actually taken just a camera and left all the lenses around and just took an 85 and see what how I shoot with that lens. So, you know, just have fun. I mean, photography is a great profession. I've done this for over 20 years. There's nothing I would ever do. I think about it all the time. It's the greatest thing in the world because you can, I mean, there's so many things to photograph, and I think photography today, even though it's different than when I started.
Mm-hmm.
It was film, and it's very different now with the digital.
Yeah.
The technology changes, but it essentially stays the same. The way you approach an assignment, what you do, and what you're trying to capture.
Right.
You know, it never changes. And
Well, the only good thing about it now is when you leave the assignment, you kind of have a good idea
yeah.
that you have what you need. Talk
Right.
to us about how many images, how many shots you take, how often do you check to see what you got, and how do you know that you have something?
Yeah, back in the day when I did it, of course, it was film, and you couldn't look at the back of your camera. You were kind of hoping you had what you had, and lots of times it was interesting because you would get back to the darkroom and process your film, and you thought you had something, and you didn't have it. You know,
It was like, ah!
Now we have the luxury of looking on the back of our cameras here, most of us with the
window,
screen, and we can check our composition. Although that may be a little hard to see sometimes, your focus in there. I mean, back in the day when you shot film, you kind of were limited. You only shot
Exactly.
2 rolls of film, and you only had a certain amount of budget. Now you can shoot as much as you want. I always just shoot until I feel that I got the shot, and with the luxury of being able to look on the back, I can pretty much tell that I have a good exposure technically, good expressions, good composition. So there's a real advantage you have today.
Mm-hmm. But as a beginning student, what would you recommend they do?
A beginning student, like I said, I would experiment. You know, do as many shots. I mean, you don't have any cost here.
Right.
As long as you have,
a computer and a card.
In a card, you can shoot as much as you want. I mean, shoot as much as you like. Experiment. Try some different lenses. There's no limit. I mean, you really don't have a budget here. You're spending extra money. There's really no limit. But you'll be able to know when you have the shot. You'll be able to look at the back of the screen and say, well, this exposure looks good. And I like the expressions. I like the composition. Mm-hmm. You should be able to tell that.
Yeah. So any other tips about establishing a rapport? You talked about maybe getting to know them a little bit and talking to them. And we talked a little bit about not getting people to pose.
Yeah, I mean, I wrote down a little thing about just portraits, the first thing is anytime you're shooting anybody, you got to put them at ease. And any way you can do that, you have to use your skills as a person. Make them feel comfortable. That's the biggest thing. I usually tell people, I say, this is your picture. This is about you. It's not about me. You'll know what to do when I start taking the pictures. This is about you. Try to involve them. The other thing is, talk it over. Like I said, talk to them about, well, what do you think would make a good picture? What do you do? What are you interested in? Is this what you do? They usually can give you some ideas, and that makes them feel comfortable because then they feel more involved. They feel like this is really, the photographer is really trying to capture who I am. Right. So that makes them feel comfortable. Good eye contact with them, you know, talking when you talk to them. You know, I mentioned the, you know, tripod that you can put up there so you can carry on a conversation with them without hiding behind this, because when you do this, it's kind of a little...
It's like, oh, now I gotta smile.
It's not as personal.
I gotta smile now.
So sometimes you can do that. You know, there's... You know, it's just using your skills. You know, most people can talk to people, and as long as you feel you're interested in what they are, and that's the great thing about my job as a photographer. I get to go out and meet all these interesting people.
Right, exactly.
And I get to see all these neat things. And
so it's looking at it in a different perspective.
Right.
And does it get easier talking to people?
It does.
Because I think it's hard for a lot of young people to do that.
It does. I mean, you just start talking to folks and you'd be surprised. I mean, you start with small talk, you know, how's the weather, and just ease into it. And then you start talking, you gain their trust. They start believing that you're here to do a nice photo of them. Mm-hmm. You know, and you just communicate. For some people it's hard. It was hard for me when I first started out. I mean, that's what I said. I was a very shy person. I hid behind the camera. I didn't really like talking to people. I liked just shooting their picture. But really,
taking pretty pictures.
Yeah, but the important part is to, you know, you have to let people know that this is their picture. You know, I'm here to make you look as good as possible. But
but there's something that's added. You know, we can all shoot a pretty picture, and I'm noticing pretty leaves and pretty buildings on your wall here. But to have a person in it, just makes it extra special. I mean, these are nice pictures, but to really have a great picture.
Right, right. And some of the greatest pictures are of people. People love to see other pictures of other people doing things, you know, and whatever it is. I mean, there's some, you know, as bad as war is, there is some beautiful historic war photos.
They studied some of them last week.
Yeah, and I think, you know, whatever setting we're in, you know, there's pictures of people always are better than I mean, people enjoy, and I shoot a lot of nature stuff and pictures of that, but
well, I think part of telling Miami story, because you're basically telling the story of what Miami University is on this certain day, may mean seeing some of the pretty pictures with snow on it or the fall leaves, because that's part of what a lot of people will remember Miami as being. But obviously, Miami would be nobody without students.
Right.
And
it's
would
really,
not be needed without students.
It's really about the people here at the university. And, you know, I enjoy photographing the students here. It's interesting to see what they do to capture the campus life. You know, it's very, very interesting to, you know, every year changes, and the students change, so there's always new subjects to photograph. But yeah, a lot of the brochures that we do for here, admissions, I mean, we'll do a few of the campus beauty things, but you know, without pictures of students doing the things here, you know,
you're not really telling the
it's
story.
not really telling the story.
Right.
So you really have to have people to tell the story.
Okay, great. Well, any other advice? I told you my students are shooting 3 photos this week, one being a weather photo. Today's a beautiful day on campus.
Yeah.
I was actually a walk to the Armstrong Student Center, and I tried taking a few photos with my iPhone, but I wasn't at the right angle, so I didn't really get a good one. And the second photo is people at play and then people at work. Any other suggestions you can give to my students as they go to find these kind of photos in their community? I think a great idea was to look at the community calendar, see if there's anything going on in your community, whether it's on the newspaper website or on the bulletin board at the community center or at a church or whatever. There's always things going on. Go to the YMCA.
Yeah,
the rec center is probably a good place today.
Yeah,
isn't it?
right, right. There, you know, and it's all about, you know, catching those moments, those candid moments that you may see out there. Any event you go to, there's going to be some things going on. You have to almost kind of look at the scene, look at what's going on. If you're at an event, if you pick an event to go to, say a festival or something, look around, see what's interesting. You know, pick something out, focus on it, experiment with different lenses and different camera angles. You know, there's a lot of different things you can do. I wrote down some here, you know, on catching candids. It's all about kind of being in the right place at the right time, and a lot of photography is about being in the right place at the right time, getting the great shots. You know, people just have this. Photographers almost have to have an instinct of maybe anticipating what's going to happen. You know, you can watch something and you can kind of tell what might happen. So you got to be ready with your camera. And I recommend, you know, you use the aperture priority so you can control the depth of field. And then also, you know, most of the time when you're on those aperture priority automatic settings, 95% you're going to get a good exposure, so you won't have to worry about your technical part. So that's a real big thing that I think about. Autofocus, you know, use your autofocus so you get things in focus there. And you know, go out in the open. I wrote down you know, find stuff that's going on. You know, there's some different approaches to that. I've actually done things where I do one where I'm out in the open. If it's an activity, most people won't notice you. You know, you just kind of stand there and you can shoot away. Most people are doing something. The other thing is called click and run, which kind of sounds creepy, but I use that for like street photography, where you'll have a camera around your neck and you'll see something going on and you just kind of walk by them and shoot pictures, click, and you can capture moments like that. The other technique is, you know, standing way back with a longer lens and kind of focusing.
Which I don't think a lot of them will have.
Yeah, right. You won't have a longer lens, but you know, get in close. You know, wide angles you can click and capture those moments. So.
That sounds great. Yeah, you definitely don't get pictures sitting here in your office, do you?
No, you don't.
Gotta get out.
You have to be out of your office. Unfortunately, I spend a lot of time in here doing
the
what we call paperwork.
The editing part, which we'll talk about on Thursday. So,
yeah.
All right. Well, thanks so much, Scott, for visiting with us today, and I appreciate your time, and we'll look forward to many more of your beautiful pictures from Miami.
Okay. Thank you very much.